The first thing my straight coworker ever said to me after accidentally seeing my Grindr notifications was, "Don't freak out. I'm not judging. I just didn't expect it to be you." I laughed it off in the moment. I didn't realize that sentence would haunt me for months, or that it would be the beginning of something I never planned to want. His name was Luke. We worked together at a small logistics office on the edge of town. Nothing glamorous, just spreadsheets, shipping schedules, stale coffee, and too much fluorescent lighting. Luke had been there a year longer than me and unofficially ran the place when our manager disappeared into meetings that never seemed to end. He was the kind of guy people assumed was uncomplicated. Broad shoulders, calm voice, wedding ring tan line, even though he'd been single for over a year. Divorced at 28. No kids. Everyone knew the basics. I knew more than most. We'd started having lunch together almost by accident. One day he sat across from me in the break room, scrolling his phone, and said, "You ever notice how this microwave smells like regret?" After that, it was routine. We talked about everything except feelings. Work, music, his dog, my awful dating history, which I carefully edited to sound vague and heterosexual enough to avoid questions. He never pushed. That's why the Grindr thing hit so hard. I'd been leaning over his desk, pointing out an error in a shipment manifest, when my phone lit up in my pocket. It buzzed, once, twice, and Luke glanced down instinctively. I saw the moment recognition crossed his face. The flash of surprise. The quick decision not to say anything. Too late. "Sorry," I muttered, pulling my phone out and silencing it. He didn't look away. That an app? I should have lied. I don't know why I didn't. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It is." There was a beat. Then another. "Oh," he said. "Okay." That was it. No awkward follow-up. No weird energy. He just leaned back in his chair and added, "Anyway, this column's off by a decimal." I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. That night, he texted me. "Hope I didn't make you uncomfortable earlier. Didn't mean to stare." I stared at my phone for a long time before replying. "You didn't. I should have been more careful." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. "You don't have to be careful around me." I felt something shift in my chest. After that, things changed in small ways that were easy to ignore if you wanted to. Luke started lingering after work, offering rides when it rained, asking more questions. Not about dating exactly, but adjacent to it. "What's it like?" he asked one night as we sat in his truck, engine off, parking lot empty. "What?" "Dating guys. Is it simpler or harder?" I shrugged. "Different hard." He nodded like that meant something to him. A week later, his apartment flooded. Burst pipe. Insurance mess. Nowhere to stay for a few days. "I know this is a lot to ask," he said, standing in my doorway with a duffel bag and an apologetic half smile. "But you're literally the only person I trust not to make this weird." I should have said no. Instead, I stepped aside and said, "Couch is yours." The first night was fine. Too fine. We drank beer, watched a documentary neither of us followed, and talked until midnight. He fell asleep on the couch. I lay awake in my bedroom, listening to the rhythm of his breathing through the wall. The second night, I woke up to the sound of him pacing. I checked the time. 2:17 a.m. knock came at my door. Soft. Hesitant. "Hey," he said when I opened it. His voice was low. "Careful. Can't sleep." I stepped back without thinking. "You okay?" He nodded, then shook his head. "I don't know." He sat on the edge of my bed like he didn't trust himself to get too comfortable. Hands clasped, eyes on the floor. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I already knew this wasn't a small question. "Yeah," he swallowed. "When you realized you liked guys, was it sudden? Or did it sneak up on you?" My heart started pounding. A bit of both, I said honestly. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. I keep thinking I'm just lonely, he said, that I miss being close to someone. But then I think about you, and it doesn't feel the same as that. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I don't know what that means, he continued, and I'm not asking you to fix it. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who wouldn't laugh. I looked at him then. Really looked. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't drunken bravado. This was fear, and something else underneath it. Something dangerous. Luke, I said carefully, you don't have to figure anything out tonight. He nodded. I know. He stood up, hesitated. Thanks for letting me stay, he added. Really, as he turned to leave, his hand brushed mine. Neither of us pulled away right away. And in that moment, silent, charged, terrifying, I knew this wasn't just a confession. It was the first crack in something that was about to break wide open. I didn't sleep after Luke left my room. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the way his hand had brushed mine like it was an accident. But neither of us had treated it like one. That half-second linger stretched in my mind, looping over and over until it felt heavier than the entire conversation we'd just had. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. Men question things all the time. Especially divorced ones, especially lonely ones, especially ones who trusted you enough to talk without filters. That didn't mean anything had to happen. Still, when I walked into the kitchen and found Luke already there, shirtless, leaning against the counter with a mug of coffee, my chest tightened. He glanced up. Our eyes met. There was no awkwardness. That somehow made it worse. Morning, he said casually. Morning, I replied, grabbing my own mug and pretending my hands weren't shaking. He watched me longer than necessary. Not staring, just present. Sorry if I dumped a lot on you last night, he said. Didn't mean to mess up your sleep. You didn't, I lied. I'm glad you said something. He nodded, relieved, but not finished. The next few days blurred together in a strange, quiet tension. Luke slept on the couch, but the distance between us felt smaller than when we'd shared separate apartments. We brushed past each other in hallways. Our shoulders bumped. Our conversations lingered just a beat too long after the point where they should have ended. At work, he was careful, professional, almost distant. At home, it was like something was slowly pulling tight between us. One night, while we were cooking dinner, I caught him watching me from across the kitchen. Not in a hungry way, in a thoughtful one. Like he was studying a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve. You ever regret coming out? He asked suddenly. The question hit me harder than anything he'd said so far. I set the spatula down. Sometimes. But not because I'm gay. Because of people. He nodded slowly. Yeah, that makes sense. We ate in silence after that. The breaking point came 3 nights later. A storm rolled in out of nowhere. Thunder rattling the windows. Rain slamming down like it had something to prove. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. Luke cursed softly. Of course! I lit a couple candles and set them on the coffee table. The apartment filled with shadows, everything softer, quieter, too intimate. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, watching the rain streak down the windows. I hate storms, Luke admitted. I looked at him. Really? Yeah, he said with a shrug. Makes everything feel out of control. Another crack of thunder echoed outside. He tensed, just barely, but I noticed. Without thinking, I shifted closer. Not touching. Just nearer. He didn't move away. I've been thinking about what you said, he murmured after a while. About not needing to figure everything out? He nodded. And about you. My throat went dry. I don't want to screw this up, he said quietly. You're important to me. You've been grounding. Since the divorce, since everything kind of fell apart. I turned toward him fully now. Luke. But, he continued, voice tight. I can't stop wondering what would happen if I didn't fight this. The air felt thick, charged. Wondering what? I asked. Even though I knew, his jaw flexed. If I let myself feel what I feel. The thunder rolled again, closer this time. He flinched, and this time, he leaned into me. Just barely, shoulder to shoulder. Neither of us spoke. I could feel his warmth through the thin fabric of his shirt. His breathing was uneven, shallow, like he was holding something back with everything he had. "Tell me to stop," he said. I didn't. Instead, I said the truth. The one I'd buried for months. "I've wanted you since the day we started having lunch together." He turned sharply. "You have?" I nodded. "But I never expected anything. I didn't want to put that on you." His expression shifted, shock giving way to something deeper, something heavier. "God," he whispered, "that makes this worse." "How?" "Because now I know this isn't just in my head." His hand lifted, hovering between us like he was asking permission without words. I didn't answer verbally. I just stayed still. When his fingers finally touched my arm, it wasn't sexual. It was tentative, careful, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I've never done this." "I know," I said softly. "We don't have to rush." He laughed weakly. "Funny thing is, I don't want to rush. I just don't want to keep pretending this isn't real." Another beat of thunder cracked overhead. The lights stayed off. The world stayed small. Luke leaned in slowly, so slowly I could have stopped him at any point. Our foreheads touched first. He breathed out. "This okay?" "Yes." That was all it took. The kiss was gentle, uncertain, lips barely brushing like they were learning each other in real time. No hunger, no urgency, just curiosity and 1,000 unspoken fears. When he pulled back, his eyes were glassy. "Fuck," he whispered. "I don't regret that." Neither did I. But as we sat there, hands still touching, both of us knew this was no longer a moment we could undo. It was a beginning. The kiss didn't turn into anything else that night. That surprised me. We sat there on the couch afterward, foreheads no longer touching but close enough that I could feel Luke's breath when he exhaled. His hand was still on my arm, thumb brushing absent-mindedly over my skin like he'd forgotten it was there, or like he didn't want to remember. "I should probably sleep," he said eventually, voice low and careful. "Yeah," I agreed. "Probably." Neither of us moved. The storm raged on outside, rain hammering against the windows, thunder rolling so loud it rattled the frames. The apartment felt cut off from the rest of the world, suspended in that strange quiet you only get during a blackout, when time seems to slow down just to watch what you'll do next. Luke finally stood, running a hand over his face like he was trying to reset himself. "Thank you," he said, "for not making this weird." I almost laughed. "Almost." "Come on," I said gently. "You can't say that after literally kissing me." A corner of his mouth twitched. "Yeah, guess not." He hesitated at the hallway, then looked back. Night. Night. When his bedroom door closed, the apartment felt emptier than it had before he moved in. I lay awake for hours again, but this time it wasn't anxiety keeping me up. It was memory. The softness of his lips. The way he'd checked in, asked if it was okay. The fact that he hadn't tried to push it further, hadn't turned it into something messy or rushed. That restraint made it harder, not easier. The next morning, the power was back on, the storm gone like it had never happened. Sunlight poured through the windows, bright and unforgiving. Real life lighting. The kind that made everything feel more exposed. Luke was already dressed for work when I came out of my room. Button-down shirt, dark jeans. Normal. Familiar. He smiled at me like nothing had changed. But his eyes lingered. "Coffee?" he asked. Yeah, I said. Please. We moved around each other in the kitchen, careful but not distant. Our hands brushed once when we reached for the creamer at the same time. This time, he didn't pull away immediately. About last night, he said quietly. I braced myself. I meant what I said, he continued. I don't regret it. I just want to do this right. Whatever. This is... I nodded. Me too. That became our unspoken agreement. We didn't tell anyone. Not at work. Not friends. Not even in vague terms. On the outside, everything looked the same. Lunch breaks. Rides home. Casual conversations about deadlines and dogs and weekend plans. But at home, the lines blurred. Luke started sitting closer, leaning in when he talked. Resting his arm along the back of the couch, just behind my shoulders, never quite touching unless I leaned back into it. When I did, he didn't move away. We kissed again 2 nights later. And then again the night after that, always slow, always careful. Like we were both afraid of what would happen if we went too fast, and equally afraid of what would happen if we stopped. The tension built quietly, relentlessly. One evening, about a week after the storm, Luke came home later than usual. He looked drained, jaw tight, shoulders stiff. Rough day, I asked. He dropped his keys into the bowl, harder than necessary. Yeah. I didn't push. I just handed him a beer and sat beside him. We watched TV without really watching it. At some point, he exhaled sharply and muted the screen. I ran into my ex today, he said. Oh, I replied. How was that? He laughed humorlessly. She asked if I'd started dating again. I told her no, and she looked relieved. That sucks. Yeah. He stared at his hands. Then she said something like, You always did struggle with knowing what you wanted. I frowned. That's not fair. No, he agreed. But it hit close to home. Silence stretched between us. I wanted to tell her about you, he admitted. Not like, announce it, just be honest. But I didn't. My chest tightened. Why not? He looked at me then. Really looked. Because I'm still scared. I appreciated the honesty more than any reassurance. I don't need you to have it all figured out, I said. I just need to know you're not using me to avoid dealing with something else. He nodded immediately. I'm not, I swear. He reached for my hand this time without hesitation, laced our fingers together. I think about you constantly, he said. At work. At night. I catch myself smiling like an idiot for no reason. That's not avoidance. That's something else. I squeezed his hand. Okay. That was the night things finally shifted. The kiss started the same as always. Slow, exploratory, but something in him broke open. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer. Not desperate. Intentional. Tell me if I need to stop, he murmured against my mouth. I shook my head. You don't. When we ended up in my bedroom, it still didn't feel rushed. Clothes stayed on longer than expected. We talked. We laughed nervously. He admitted he'd never even thought about kissing a guy before me. I keep waiting for it to feel wrong, he confessed. And it doesn't. It doesn't have to, I said. When we finally lay together, tangled but still learning, it felt less like a secret and more like a truth we'd both been circling for a long time. Afterward, he rested his forehead against my chest, eyes closed. This changes things, he said. Yes, I agreed. He didn't sound afraid when he replied. I think I'm okay with that. Waking up next to Luke felt unreal in a quiet, almost fragile way. Not in a fireworks, movie montage sense. There were no dramatic realizations or sudden panic. Just the weight of his arm across my stomach, the slow rise and fall of his breathing against my shoulder, and the soft, gray light of early morning filling the room. For a few seconds, I forgot everything else. Then reality crept in, not harshly but firmly. Work, the office. The fact that we weren't just two guys who crossed the line, but coworkers. Friends. Something undefined and risky. Luke shifted beside me, groaning softly as he woke up. "Morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "Morning." He blinked a few times, then smiled. Small, genuine. The kind of smile you don't fake. "Still feels real," he said quietly. "That's good." I laughed softly. "Glad to hear it." He didn't move right away. Just stayed there, studying my face like he was committing it to memory. Eventually, he sighed and rolled onto his back, staring up at the ceiling. "I've been trying to think of a version of this where I freak out," he admitted. "And I can't find one." "That doesn't mean you won't," I said gently. "You're allowed to be confused." "I know," he said. "But I don't feel confused about you. I feel confused about everything else." That distinction mattered more than he'd probably realized. We got up slowly, deliberately avoiding the urge to rush through normalcy. Coffee, toast, casual conversation. We moved like two people learning a new rhythm, careful not to step on each other's toes. At work, the shift was immediate and invisible to everyone else. Luke was quieter, focused, but every now and then, I'd feel his eyes on me from across the room. When our gazes met, something unspoken passed between us. Not desire, exactly. Recognition. At lunch, he didn't sit across from me like usual. He sat beside me, our knees brushed under the table. Neither of us moved away. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from him. "Can we talk tonight?" "Like, really talk?" I replied instantly. "Yeah." When we got home, he didn't even sit down. He paced the living room, running a hand through his hair, nerves suddenly back in full force. "I've been thinking about what this means," he said. "About labels, about expectations, about whether I owe anyone an explanation." I stayed quiet, letting him unravel at his own pace. "I'm not ready to tell people I'm anything," he continued. "And I don't know if I ever will be. I just know I don't want to pretend this didn't happen." I nodded. "I'm not asking you to come out. I just need honesty." "You have that," he said immediately, "even when it's uncomfortable." He stepped closer, stopping just in front of me. "There's something else," he added. "And I need you to be honest too." "Okay. Are you okay with this being private?" "For now." I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because I needed to check in with myself. "I can be," I said finally, "as long as it doesn't turn into hiding because you're ashamed." His expression tightened. "I'm not ashamed of you." "I know," I said softly. "Just make sure you remember that too." He reached out, resting his hands on my hips, grounding himself. "I don't want to lose this," he said, "whatever it is." That night, things stayed gentle, familiar in a new way. We talked more than anything about his marriage, about my past relationships, about fear and expectations, and the strange freedom of not knowing where things would land. Over the next few weeks, we settled into something that felt both easy and precarious. At work, we were professional, careful, sometimes frustratingly so. At home, we were close in quiet ways, shared dinners, late-night conversations, stolen moments when we passed each other in the hallway, and our hands found one another without thinking. Luke struggled some days. There were moments when he pulled back, not physically, but emotionally, when old habits crept in. When he'd make a comment about women or dating that felt like armor more than truth. Instead of confronting him every time, I learned to watch. And he learned to come back. One evening, after a long day, he sat beside me and said, "I told my sister." My heart jumped. "Yeah?" "She didn't even blink," he said with a faint smile. "Just said, 'Is he good to you?'" I laughed, relief flooding through me. "That's a good question." "I told her yes," he said, "because you are." That was the first crack in the wall between his private and public self. It didn't mean everything was solved. It didn't mean smooth sailing ahead. But it meant progress. And lying there with him that night, listening to his breathing slow as sleep took over, I realized something important. This wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a choice. And for now, despite the uncertainty, despite the fear, we were both choosing it. The first real test came from the outside. It was a Thursday afternoon when our manager announced a last-minute team dinner, mandatory, of course, at a loud, overcrowded restaurant downtown. The kind of place where conversations overlapped and no one had any sense of personal space. I saw Luke stiffen the second the words "everyone's expected to come" left her mouth. "You okay?" I asked quietly when we were alone by the printer. "Yeah," he said too fast. Then, softer, "Just need to think." I knew what he was thinking, what we were thinking. We hadn't existed together in public yet. Not really. No shared glances that lingered. No hands brushing without plausible deniability. At work, we were still pretending this thing between us didn't exist at all. That night at the restaurant, Luke sat 2 seats away from me, not because he didn't want to be closer, but because he was trying to protect something he wasn't sure how to defend yet. I didn't resent him for it. Still, it hurt more than I expected. People drank, laughed, complained about deadlines. Someone made a joke about dating apps, and I watched Luke tense again, jaw tightening like he was bracing for impact. So Luke, one of our coworkers, said, smirking, "You seeing anyone these days or still enjoying bachelor life?" I didn't look at him. I focused on my plate, heart pounding. Luke paused, just long enough for the silence to stretch. "Seeing someone?" he said finally. My breath caught. "Oh?" she grinned. "Anyone we know?" Luke glanced at me. Not long, not obvious, but enough that my pulse spiked. "No," he said evenly. "It's private." There was a brief, awkward lull. Then someone else jumped in with a joke, and the moment passed. But everything had shifted. The walk home was quiet. When we got inside the apartment, Luke shut the door and leaned back against it, exhaling hard. "I almost said it," he admitted. "Said what?" "That I was seeing you." I swallowed. "Why didn't you?" He pushed himself off the door and crossed the room, stopping in front of me. Because I didn't want my first time saying it out loud to be over cheap margaritas with people who don't get to have an opinion. That answer surprised me, in a good way. He took my hands, squeezing them gently. "I'm not ashamed," he said. "I'm just protective." That night, he didn't pull away at all. The weeks after that were a mix of forward steps and quiet hesitation. Luke started opening up in ways that felt both vulnerable and deeply personal. He talked about his marriage, how it had ended not with some explosive betrayal, but with a slow erosion. How he'd always felt like he was performing a version of himself that made sense to everyone else. "I thought that was just adulthood," he admitted one night, "settling into the shape people expect." "And now?" I asked. "And now I'm realizing I don't know what my shape is yet." He said it without panic, without regret, just honesty. One evening, after a long walk through the neighborhood, he stopped under a streetlight and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Open, nervous, hopeful. "I don't want this to be temporary," he said. My chest tightened. "What do you want it to be?" "I want to keep choosing you," he replied. "Even if it's messy. Even if I mess up sometimes." I didn't hesitate. "I'm already choosing you." That was the first time he kissed me in public. Not deeply, not dramatically. Just a brief press of lips, warm and deliberate, like he was testing reality and finding it solid. A few days later, his sister came over. Luke warned me beforehand, pacing the apartment like he was about to give a presentation instead of introduce the guy he was quietly falling for. "She's cool," he said, "but she's perceptive." "She already knows about me," I reminded him. "Yeah," he said, which somehow makes this more terrifying. Dinner was surprisingly normal. She asked about my job, teased Luke about his cooking, told a story about their childhood that made him groan and bury his face in his hands. At one point, she excused herself to the bathroom. Luke leaned in and whispered, "You're doing great." "I'm just existing," I whispered back. She returned, sat down, and looked between us thoughtfully. "So," she said, "are you happy?" Luke answered before I could. "Yeah, I am," she smiled. "Good. That's all I care about." Later that night, after she left, Luke wrapped his arms around me and just held on. "I didn't know it could feel like this," he said quietly, being seen without feeling cornered. I rested my forehead against his. "You deserve that." We weren't naive. We knew there would be harder conversations ahead. Labels, boundaries, the reality of existing in a world that loved neat categories. But lying there with him, his hand steady at my back, I felt something I hadn't let myself hope for in a long time. Not certainty, but security. And sometimes that was enough. The first time Luke introduced me as someone important, instead of just my name, it caught me off guard. We were at a small backyard barbecue his sister hosted, a low-key thing with mismatched lawn chairs, cheap beer, and a handful of people who'd known Luke his entire life. I hadn't realized how insulated our world had been until that moment, how safe and contained everything felt inside the apartment, at work, in the quiet spaces we'd carved out together. This was different. Luke's hand found the small of my back as we stepped through the gate. Not possessive, not showy, just there, grounding both of us. "You okay?" he murmured. "Yeah," I said. "You?" He exhaled slowly. "Ask me again in 10 minutes. The afternoon unfolded gently at first. His sister greeted us with a knowing smile. A few friends nodded hello. Someone handed Luke a beer and made a joke about his grilling skills. It all felt almost normal, until it didn't. "So how do you two know each other?" a guy asked, flipping a burger. Luke glanced at me instinctively. A silent check-in. "We work together," I said easily. "And live together," Luke added. There it was. The first thread pulled. The guy raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, since when?" Luke didn't hesitate. "A few months." "And you're?" he prompted, looking between us. Luke's jaw tightened just slightly. I felt it through his hand on my back. "He's with me," Luke said. Simple. Clear. No apology. The air shifted. Not dramatically, not explosively, but enough that I noticed. Enough that Luke noticed too. "Oh," the guy said, then shrugged. "Cool." And that was it. No confrontation. No speeches. Just a moment where Luke stood there, shoulders squared, choosing honesty over comfort. Later, when we were sitting on the back steps with our beers, I nudged him gently. "You did good," I said. He huffed a quiet laugh. I was shaking. I couldn't tell. "That's because I'm learning how to fake confidence," he replied. Then, softer, "But I meant it." That night, back at the apartment, the adrenaline finally wore off. Luke grew quiet in that way I'd come to recognize, processing, replaying, weighing every interaction. He sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "Did I mess anything up?" he asked. I moved closer. "No. Why would you think that?" he sighed. "Because this still feels like borrowed time. Like eventually someone's going to say the wrong thing, or I'm going to freeze, and you'll get hurt because I wasn't ready fast enough." I sat beside him, pressing our shoulders together. "Luke," I said carefully, "I'm choosing you knowing this isn't easy for you. I'm not waiting for a perfect version of you." He looked at me then, eyes heavy with something like relief. "I don't deserve how patient you are," he said. "Good thing relationships aren't about deserving," I replied. "They're about showing up." That seemed to settle something in him. The real fracture came a week later. Work had been tense. Deadlines piling up, tempers short, Luke had been distant all day, clipped in his responses, eyes tired. I knew something was wrong, but I waited until we were home. "What's going on?" I asked, finally. He dropped his bag and ran a hand through his hair. "My ex called." My stomach sank. "Yeah?" "She heard through someone. Don't ask who. That I'm seeing someone. A guy." I sat down slowly. "And?" "And she wasn't angry," he said, voice tight. "She was confused. Said she wondered if this was why things never quite worked with us." That hit deeper than I expected. "I didn't know what to say," he continued, "because part of me thinks she might be right. And that scares the hell out of me." I took a breath. "Luke, realizing something new about yourself doesn't erase your past. It just explains it." He shook his head. "But what if I've been lying to myself for years? What if I hurt people because I didn't know who I was?" "You didn't lie," I said firmly. "You survived with the tools you had." He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. "I don't want you to be collateral damage," he said quietly. I sat beside him, taking his hands and pulling them away from his face. "Look at me," I said. He did. "I'm not collateral," I continued. "I'm here because I want to be. Because even with the uncertainty, this feels real to me." His eyes softened, but the fear was still there. "I don't know what this makes me," he admitted. "Straight, bi, something else. I don't know if I ever will." "You don't have to," I said. "Not for me." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. "I love you," he said suddenly. The words hung in the air, fragile and terrifying and impossibly honest. I didn't hesitate. "I love you too." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. That night, for the first time, he didn't sleep on the edge of the bed like he might disappear. He wrapped himself around me, solid and present, like he was finally letting himself stay. The future was still uncertain, labels still unspoken, conversations still ahead. But in that moment, with his heartbeat steady against my back, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever we were building, it was no longer fragile. It was rooted. After Luke said "I love you," something subtle but unmistakable changed between us. Not everything. Fear didn't evaporate overnight, and the world didn't suddenly feel simple, but the center of gravity shifted. We stopped bracing for collapse. We stopped talking like this was something we were borrowing from the future. It became something we were actively building. The first thing that changed was how Luke moved through the world. He didn't announce anything, didn't post, didn't label, didn't make declarations, but he stopped editing himself around me. He stopped catching his hand halfway to mine in public spaces, stopped pretending certain silences didn't exist. It was in the little things. The way he leaned into me at the grocery store while deciding between brands of pasta. The way he rested his chin on my shoulder while I brushed my teeth. The way he introduced me to a friend from college as the person I'm with without hesitation. Each moment felt like a quiet claim. The tension at work eased too, not because it disappeared, but because Luke stopped letting it run him. We stayed professional, but the distance he'd kept before softened. At lunch, he sat beside me again. In meetings, our eyes met without that split second of panic. One afternoon, our manager joked, "You two are in sync lately." Luke smiled and said, "Yeah, we make a good team." He didn't look at me when he said it, but his knee nudged mine under the table. That night, after dinner, Luke sat unusually still on the couch. Not anxious, just thoughtful. "I've been thinking about moving," he said finally. My stomach tightened before I could stop it. "Moving? Where?" "Not away," he clarified quickly. "Just together. Somewhere that's ours. Not an emergency solution or a temporary fix." I exhaled. "You mean actually moving in?" He nodded. "Only if you want to. I don't want to rush you or trap you. Or—" I kissed him before he could spiral. "I want that," I said. Relief crossed his face so fast it almost made me laugh. "We didn't make a big plan. No timelines, no dramatic promises. Just started browsing listings, talking about neighborhoods, imagining a life that didn't need footnotes. The real reckoning came sooner than either of us expected. It happened at work. One of our coworkers, someone neither of us trusted but had never caused trouble, cornered Luke near the elevators. I wasn't there, but I heard about it the moment Luke got home, face pale, jaw tight. He asked if we were together. Luke said flatly. I sat up. And? I said yes. My heart jumped. You did? He smirked. Luke continued. Said something like, didn't see that coming. Then asked if HR knew. Anger flared through me. That's not okay. I know, Luke said. But here's the thing. I didn't panic. He sat down beside me, taking my hands. I told him our personal lives weren't his business, and that if he had concerns about professionalism, he could take them up with management. I blinked. You did? Yeah, he said quietly. And I meant it. There was pride in his voice, not arrogance, just steadiness. I realized something, he added. I don't feel like I'm hiding anymore. I'm just choosing where to be open. That distinction mattered. We talked late into the night about boundaries, about work politics, about the reality that not everyone would be kind or curious in a good way. But for the first time, it felt like a challenge we were facing together, not something I was absorbing alone to protect him. A few days later, Luke asked me to meet his parents. Not a casual drop-in, a deliberate visit. I don't need you to impress them, he said, pacing the apartment. I just need you there. I squeezed his hand. I'll be there. The visit was complicated. His mom was warm but cautious. His dad was polite in the way men are when they're still processing something they didn't expect. There were no confrontations, no tears, just careful conversation and long pauses. At one point, his dad asked, "Are you happy?" Luke answered without looking at me. "Yes," he said. "I am." On the drive home, Luke was quiet. When we parked, he rested his forehead on the steering wheel. That was harder than I thought, he admitted. You did great, I said. He turned to me, eyes shining but steady. I couldn't have done it without you. Later that night, lying in bed, Luke traced idle patterns on my arm. I used to think love was supposed to feel like certainty, he said, like having all the answers. And now? Now it feels like choosing someone even when you don't. I smiled. That sounds right. He kissed my shoulder, slow and familiar. For the first time since we'd met, the future didn't feel like a question mark. It felt like a direction. Moving into a place that was ours felt like crossing an invisible line. Not because everything suddenly became easy, but because there was no pretending anymore. No borrowed time, no mental asterisks attached to for now. Just boxes, mismatched furniture, and the quiet realization that this was no longer a secret life running parallel to the real one. The apartment wasn't fancy. Second floor walk-up. Old hardwood floors that creaked when you stepped in the wrong spot. A tiny balcony that barely fit 2 chairs. But the first night we slept there, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, Luke pulled me close and said, almost in disbelief, "This is actually happening." It was. The early weeks were filled with small, domestic discoveries. Luke learned I drank coffee too strong and complained about it anyway. I learned he needed background noise to fall asleep and pretended I didn't mind the TV murmuring at 2 a.m. We argued once about dishes and then laughed because neither of us knew how to fight yet. At work, things stayed calm. There were looks sometimes, curiosity, but no confrontations, no HR meetings, no whispered rumors that ever made it back to us directly. Luke carried himself differently now, still reserved but grounded, like he'd stopped rehearsing for a version of himself that no longer existed. One afternoon, months after everything began, we took a walk through the neighborhood as the sun dipped low, the sky streaked orange and violet. Luke stopped suddenly. "What?" I asked. He looked around, at the street, the trees, the quiet life unfolding around us. "I used to think I'd already missed my chance," he said, "at real happiness." I frowned. "Why?" Because I followed the script, got married, did the right things, and when it fell apart, I thought that was it, that I'd used up whatever luck I had. He turned to me. But this, he continued, this feels earned. Not because it's harder, but because it's honest. I took his hand. I'm glad you didn't give up. Me too, he said. Then, after a pause, there's something I want to do. That something turned out to be a small dinner with people who mattered. Not a coming out event, not an announcement, just a table full of chosen honesty. His sister. 2 close friends. A couple of mine. No speeches. No labels demanded. At one point, someone raised a glass and said, "You two look solid." Luke squeezed my hand under the table. Later that night, after everyone left and the apartment was quiet again, Luke leaned against the counter, watching me rinse dishes. "You know," he said, "there was a time I thought loving you would make everything harder." I turned. And now I realize it made everything clearer. He crossed the room, wrapping his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "I don't know what I'll call myself in 5 years," he said, "or 10. I just know who I choose." I leaned back into him, letting myself believe it without reservation. We didn't get a perfect ending. Life doesn't work like that. There were still awkward moments, still questions we didn't always have answers to, still days where fear tried to creep back in. But there was also this, morning light spilling across the bed, his hand finding mine without thinking, a shared life built not on certainty, but commitment. And if you'd asked me at the beginning, before the blackout, before the first kiss, before the quiet bravery of choosing each other, I would have said loving a straight man was a mistake. Now, I'd say loving someone who finally chose to be honest was the best thing that ever happened to me.